I hid my lupus diagnosis for 3 years to stay the perfect high school queen until I collapsed at state championships. When I finally told the truth, my mom revealed she'd been hiding the same disease for 20 years. Then she threw away my medications, stalked me at school, and tried to force-feed me healing smoothies until she got a psychiatric hold for attacking hospital staff. Turns out she'd been tracking my symptoms since birth, waiting for the disease she knew I'd inherit. I was the girl everyone wanted to be. Dance team captain, straight A's, dating Terrence Mitchell, the quarterback everyone drooled over. What they didn't see was my 5 a.m. alarm. Not for a cute workout, but for the handful of pills I had to take on an empty stomach. The concealer wasn't for under eye circles. It covered the angry red butterfly rash across my cheeks. That natural glow everyone envied. I'd been diagnosed with lupus at 14. When we left the rheumatologist that day, my mom's first words weren't about my health. They were about keeping up appearances. "No one needs to know," she said, white-knuckling the steering wheel. "You're still going to be perfect." So that's what I gave them. 3 years of perfect. Amelia, my best friend since middle school, would constantly post about how I was always so bubbly. Meanwhile, I was crushing prescription stimulants between my teeth in bathroom stalls just to stay conscious. "You never miss practice," Coach Davidson announced one day, making me stand as an example. Other girls call in sick for cramps, but not Chloe. 3 years, perfect attendance. That's what champions look like. I smiled and swallowed blood. Terrence would brag to his friends that I wasn't high maintenance like their girlfriends. "She never complains, never has those emotional days. She just shows up and looks perfect doing it." Every compliment felt like another chain around my neck. By March, my body was failing. ER visits escalated from monthly to weekly. I'd memorized which bathrooms were empty during which periods, perfected the art of silent vomiting between AP classes. Dr. Patel pulled up my labs, her face going pale. "Your kidneys are showing damage. Your inflammation markers are off the charts. Chloe, you're heading toward organ failure. State championships are in 3 weeks." I responded. "You could die," she said flatly. "Just 3 more weeks, please." She looked at me like I was already dead. The morning of state championships, I was hooked to IVs in the hospital, discharged myself against medical advice at noon, changed into my competition costume in a gas station bathroom. The sequins felt like needles against my inflamed skin. Our routine was to titanium. How fitting. I hit every move, muscle memory overriding the screaming. Then, during the aerial sequence, the one I'd done 1,000 times, something inside me snapped, then nothing. I woke up to my own heartbeat on monitors, still in my costume, sequins embedded in my skin. My phone was cracked but alive with notifications. Someone had live-streamed my collapse on the private school meme page. "Dance champion down" was trending. The comments were brutal. "Eating disorder, doctorgs, attention-seeking at its finest." But one comment stopped my heart. "Look at her face right before she falls. That's not exhaustion. That's someone dying." I returned to school with a different face. Literally. The rash had blown up my cheeks. Some days I needed a cane. No amount of concealer could hide what steroids do to your body. I sat at our usual lunch table, Amelia across from me, Terrence to my left. The cafeteria was buzzing. I was the best gossip they'd had all year. "I have lupus," I confessed. "I've had it for 3 years." I pulled out my med organizer. Not the cute vitamins I'd pretended to take, but the real thing. 15 pills, immunosuppressants, steroids, anti-inflammatories, pain management. This is my actual morning routine, not the one I posted on TikTok. Terrence immediately slid back. "Is it contagious?" The entire cafeteria heard him. Amelia's reaction was slower, more calculated. "Why didn't you tell me? I thought we were best friends. I mean, I need time to process this. This is a lot." Within days, my carefully constructed world crumbled. Coach suggested I become team manager, since dancing was probably too much now. I wasn't invited to parties anymore because they don't want me to overdo it. The prom queen campaign everyone had started for me disappeared. Amelia Terrence lasted exactly 1 week. "I'm 17, he said. "I shouldn't have to deal with someone who's sick. I want a girlfriend who can do things, you know, for me." Amelia found a new best friend, Sophia from the volleyball team. Someone who could keep up. I was packing my locker when the principal called me to her office. My mom was sitting there crying. "Tell her what you told me," the principal said. Mom looked up. "I have it too, Chloe. I've been hiding lupus for 20 years. The silence that followed stretched between us like a chasm. My mother's mascara had run down her cheeks in dark rivers, and for the first time in my life, she looked small. The principal cleared her throat and excused herself, leaving us alone in the office that suddenly felt too cramped. My mother reached for my hand, but I pulled back. 20 years of hiding, of pretending, of forcing that same toxic perfectionism onto me. The rage that bubbled up felt volcanic. She started explaining, words tumbling out in a desperate rush. Her diagnosis came in college, right before she met my father. She'd hidden it from everyone, terrified of being seen as weak or broken. When I was diagnosed, she panicked. She saw her younger self in me and thought she was protecting me by teaching me to hide too. I stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. The sound made her flinch. I walked out without a word, leaving her crying in that office. My legs carried me to the nurse's station where I collapsed into a chair, shaking. The nurse, Mrs. Luna, took one look at me and brought water without asking questions. The next few days blurred together. I moved through school like a ghost, eating lunch in the library, avoiding the cafeteria where my former life had imploded. Teachers who once praised my dedication now looked at me with pity. The dance team practiced without me, and I could hear the music echoing from the gym during 6th period. At home, the atmosphere was suffocating. My mother tried to talk to me constantly, following me from room to room. She'd pull out her own med organizer, showing me how similar our medications were, as if that would somehow bridge the gap between us. My father, who'd been kept in the dark too, walked around looking shell-shocked. One evening, she cornered me in the kitchen while I was making dinner. She blocked the doorway, her own face puffy from prednisone. The the same medication that was changing my body. She started listing all the things she'd given up, all the ways she'd protected me, how she'd researched every treatment, found the best doctors, made sure I had access to care while hiding her own flare-ups. I gripped the counter until my knuckles went white. The words I'd been holding back for days finally erupted. I told her how her obsession with perfection had nearly culled me, how I'd ignored my body's warning signs because she'd taught me that showing weakness was worse than being sick, how I'd lost everything because she couldn't face her own shame. She crumpled then, sliding down the doorframe to sit on the kitchen floor. For a moment, I saw her not as my mother, but as a frightened woman who'd spent 2 decades running from herself, but sympathy couldn't erase 3 years of suffering. The next morning, I woke to find her sitting at the foot of my bed, watching me sleep. She'd been there all night, she said, making sure I was still breathing. The invasion of privacy made my skin crawl. When I told her to leave, she refused, insisting she needed to monitor me, that she knew better than anyone what could go wrong. That's when I realized the real problem. She wasn't just controlling, she was projecting every fear, every moment of her own medical trauma onto me. In her mind, protecting me meant controlling every aspect of my illness, even if it meant destroying me in the process. I started locking my door. She'd knock constantly, leaving trays of food, supplements she'd researched, printouts of articles about lupus management. When I'd emerge for water or bathroom breaks, she'd ambush me with questions about my symptoms, my medications, whether I'd taken my temperature that morning. My father tried to mediate, but he was lost in this new reality where both his wife and daughter had been suffering in secret. He'd make awkward attempts at family dinners that would end with my mother crying and me retreating to my room. School became my escape, even with all its challenges. I'd arrive early and leave late, finding quiet corners to do homework. The library became my sanctuary. Mrs. Rodriguez, the librarian, never asked why I was there every lunch period. She'd just nod and sometimes leave a granola bar on my usual table. One afternoon, I overheard Amelia and Sophia in the bathroom. They were talking about prom, about their dresses and dinner plans. Amelia mentioned how glad she was that she didn't have to worry about me anymore, how exhausting it had been pretending to care about my perfect life when clearly I'd been lying the whole time. The casual cruelty of it made me physically sick. I rushed to the accessible bathroom, the one with the lock that actually worked, and barely made it before throwing up. The fatigue hit me like a truck afterward, and I sat on the floor, too tired to move. That's where the janitor, Mr. Vince, found me 20 minutes later. He didn't panic or call for help immediately. Instead, he sat down outside the stall and asked if I needed anything. When I finally emerged, shaky and embarrassed, he just handed me a bottle of water from his cart. He mentioned his wife had MS, that he understood how hard invisible illnesses could be. It was the first time since my diagnosis became public that someone had talked to me like I was still a person, not a walking medical crisis. That small kindness broke something in me. I started crying and couldn't stop. Mr. Vince just sat there, occasionally handing me paper towels, until I'd cried myself empty. I wonder what made Chloe's mom think hiding her own illness for 20 years was somehow helping her daughter. There's something strange about teaching your kid to hide the exact same disease you have while secretly managing it yourself. Seems like there's more to this fear than just wanting to look perfect. Then he walked me to the nurse's office, staying until he was sure I was okay. When I got home that day, I found my mother had rearranged my room. She'd installed a medical alert button by my bed, laid out my pills in a new organizer she'd bought, and put a blood pressure cuff on my nightstand. My private space had been transformed into a makeshift hospital room. The violation of it sent me into a rage I didn't know I was capable of. I swept everything off the nightstand, pills scattering across the floor. My mother rushed in at the noise, and when she saw what I'd done, she dropped to her knees, frantically trying to collect the medication, crying about how expensive it was, how dangerous it was for me to miss doses. Watching her crawl around my floor, desperate and frantic, something shifted. This wasn't about me. This had never been about me. This was about her terror, her inability to face her own mortality, her need to control something in a situation that was fundamentally uncontrollable. I helped her pick up the pills, both of us on our hands and knees in silence. When we'd collected them all, she sat back on her heels, looking older than I'd ever seen her. She started to speak, but I held up my hand. I told her I needed space, real space, to figure out how to live with this disease on my own terms. The look of panic on her face was immediate. She started listing all the things that could go wrong, all the ways I could hurt myself without her constant vigilance, but I stood firm. I told her that her fear was suffocating me worse than the lupus ever could. The standoff in my bedroom lasted 3 days. My mother stationed herself outside my door, sleeping on an air mattress in the hallway. I'd hear her shifting throughout the night, occasionally checking the doorknob. When I needed the bathroom, she'd follow at a distance, pretending to dust picture frames or reorganize the linen closet. My father brought me meals, sliding them through barely opened doors while she hovered behind him, craning to see inside my room. On the 4th morning, I woke to find my medication missing from my nightstand. Panic shot through me as I searched drawers, under the bed, everywhere. The immunosuppressants couldn't be skipped. My hands shook as I yanked open my door to find her sitting cross-legged on the hallway floor, my med organizer in her lap. She looked up with hollow eyes and explained she'd researched a new treatment protocol online, something about vitamin supplements and essential oils that could reduce my dependency on pharmaceuticals. She'd already thrown out half my prescriptions, she admitted, replacing them with herbal alternatives she'd ordered overnight. The room tilted. I lunged for the organizer, but she clutched it tighter, insisting this was for my own good. My father appeared from their bedroom, still in pajamas, and I watched his face go white as I explained what she'd done. He grabbed the pills from her hands while she wailed about toxic chemicals and natural healing. We spent the next hour at the kitchen table, sorting through what she'd tampered with. 3 days of immunosuppressants were gone, flushed down the toilet. My anti-inflammatories had been replaced with turmeric capsules. The only medications left untouched were the ones pills she also took, as if those were somehow safer. Dr. Patel's emergency line connected on the third ring. I explained the situation while my mother shouted corrections and justifications in the background. The doctor's voice turned sharp as she ordered me to come in immediately. Missing those doses could trigger a severe flare. She'd have to adjust my entire treatment plan. My father drove me to the appointment while my mother followed in her own car, despite his attempts to convince her to stay home. In the waiting room, she pulled out a notebook filled with printed articles about lupus cures, highlighting passages about patients who'd gone into remission through diet and positive thinking. Other patients stared as she grew increasingly agitated, insisting the doctors were keeping us sick for profit. Dr. Patel called security when my mother tried to follow us into the examination room. 2 guards had to physically block her while she screamed about parental rights and medical conspiracies. Through the door, I could hear her demanding to speak to supervisors, threatening to report the entire practice. The examination revealed what I'd feared. My inflammation markers had spiked. The careful balance we'd maintained for months was disrupted. Dr. Patel prescribed a stronger course of steroids to prevent organ involvement, warning that the side effects would be severe. More weight gain, more facial swelling, potential mood changes. Back in the waiting room, my mother had been moved to a corner chair, a security guard standing nearby. She rushed over when she saw me, grabbing at the prescription bag, trying to read the labels. My father had to pry her fingers off while she sobbed about poisoning her baby. The ride home was silent except for her occasional whimpers from the back seat. At every red light, she'd lean forward, touching my shoulder, checking my temperature with the back of her hand. My father's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. That night, she picked the lock on my bedroom door while I slept. I woke to find her sitting on my bed, holding a glass of murky green liquid. A smoothie, she explained, with spirulina and wheatgrass and dozens of supplements that would cleanse my system. When I refused to drink it, she tried to force it to my lips, spilling the thick mixture across my sheets. My father found us struggling. The smoothie splattered across the walls. He pulled her away while she shrieked about saving my life. I locked myself in the bathroom, sitting on the cold tile floor, listening to them argue through the walls. He was threatening to leave, to take me with him. She was accusing him of wanting me to die. The next morning, she was gone. My father explained she'd driven to a holistic healing center 3 hours away, convinced she'd find the cure that would save us both. He'd hidden my medications in his office safe, changing the combination. We ate breakfast in exhausted silence. She returned 2 days later with a car full of supplies, crystals for healing energy, specialized water filters to remove toxins, electromagnetic field blockers for the house. She'd spent thousands of dollars, maxing out credit cards. When my father confronted her, she accused him of being part of the problem, of being brainwashed by Western medicine. I started taking my medications at school, storing them in the nurse's office. Mrs. Luna would watch me swallow each med, documenting it in a log. My mother discovered this arrangement when she tried to pick me up early for a surprise appointment with an alternative healer. The confrontation in the nurse's office required another security intervention. She began showing up at school randomly, claiming she needed to check on me. She'd peer through classroom windows, follow me between periods, sit in her car in the parking lot with binoculars. Other students started calling me Psycho's daughter. Teachers had to lock their doors when she tried to interrupt classes to bring me supplements. The breaking point came during a routine blood draw at the hospital. She'd insisted on accompanying me, promising to behave. While the phlebotomist prepared the needles, my mother suddenly grabbed the tray, throwing it across the room. She screamed that they were stealing my blood for experiments, that they were making me sicker with each test. Hospital security restrained her while she thrashed and bit. I watched them carry her out, her eyes wild and unfocused. My father arrived to find me still in the blood draw chair, the phlebotomist holding gauze to my arm, both of us too shocked to speak. The psychiatric hold lasted 72 hours. During that time, my father and I moved my essentials to my grandmother's house across town. He filed for emergency custody and a restraining order. The house felt hollow as we packed, her presence somehow still filling every room despite her absence. My grandmother, my father's mother, had watched our family's destruction from afar. She'd tried to intervene years ago when my mother first started showing signs of paranoia, but my father had always made excuses. Now she converted her guest room into a space for me, carefully avoiding any medical equipment that might trigger memories. The first night there, I slept for 14 hours straight. No one checked on me, no one tried to force feed me smoothies, no one reorganized my pills. I woke disoriented, almost missing the chaos before remembering why I'd left. My mother was released with a diagnosis of medical anxiety disorder and prescribed therapy she refused to attend. She called my father's phone hundreds of times daily, leaving voicemails that grew increasingly frantic. She was dying, she claimed. Her lupus was flaring without me there to remind her to take her medications. It was manipulation, but it still made my chest tight. She started stalking my social media through fake accounts, commenting on posts with medical advice and warnings about my friends being bad influences. When I blocked her, she created new profiles. When I went private, she messaged my friends directly, trying to get information about my health. One afternoon, she appeared at my grandmother's house while I was home alone. She'd lost weight, her own lupus clearly flaring from stress and poor self-care. She stood on the porch, pressing her face against the window, begging me to let her in. She had research, she said, new treatments that would save us both. I called my father while she pounded on the door. By the time he arrived, she'd moved to the backyard, trying windows. The police found her attempting to remove a screen. They recognized her from previous calls and took her away without much discussion. Picture frames getting dusted multiple times a day while mom camps outside the bedroom door. That hallway probably became the cleanest spot in the house during those 3 days. The restraining order was granted the next week. She wasn't allowed within 500 feet of me, my school, or my grandmother's house. In court, she represented herself, presenting a binder of medical articles as evidence that she was protecting me. The judge ordered mandatory psychiatric treatment. For a few weeks, there was peace. I established routines with my medications, attended appointments without drama, even returned to some social activities. My body responded well to consistent treatment. The facial swelling reduced, my energy improved. I felt like I was finally learning to live with lupus instead of despite it. Then the letters started arriving at school. She'd found a loophole, legally allowed to send mail as long as it wasn't threatening. Pages and pages of medical research, supplement recommendations, warnings about long-term steroid use. The envelopes grew thicker each day until the school had to refuse delivery. She hired a private investigator to follow me, documenting my daily routines. Photos of me at doctor's appointments appeared in our mailbox with notes about how tired I looked, how the medications were culling me slowly. My father tried to have her arrested, but technically she hadn't violated the restraining order. I changed my routes to school, varied my schedule, but she always seemed to know where I'd be. One day, I found her car parked outside my rheumatologist's office. She wasn't in it, but there was a note on my windshield, a printed article about a girl who died from lupus medications, with my name written in red ink across the top. My grandmother started driving me everywhere, but even that didn't stop the harassment. My mother would call relatives, spreading lies about my father poisoning me, about my grandmother enabling abuse. Family members who'd been supportive began questioning our decisions, wondering if maybe she had a point about natural treatments. The stress triggered the flare Dr. Patel had warned about. I woke one morning with joints so swollen I couldn't open my hands. My grandmother found me crying on the bathroom floor, unable to turn the doorknob. The hospital admitted me for intensive treatment. Somehow, my mother found out which room I was in. She couldn't enter the hospital due to the restraining order, but she stood in the parking lot with a megaphone, shouting about medical kidnapping. Security had to establish a perimeter. Local news showed up, drawn by the spectacle. From my window, I watched her collapse in the parking lot. The stress and her own untreated lupus had caught up. The irony wasn't lost on me as ambulances arrived. As she was admitted to the same hospital she'd been protesting, they put her 3 floors below me. My father had to make medical decisions for her when she refused treatment. She needed kidney support, high-dose steroids, the same medications she'd tried to deny me. The psychiatric team diagnosed her with severe medical PTSD from her own diagnosis decades ago, manifesting as an obsessive need to control my treatment. I snuck down to see her once while she was sedated. She looked small in the hospital bed, her face swollen from the same steroids she'd called poison. Her chart showed inflammation levels worse than mine had ever been. 20 years of hiding had taken its toll. When she woke, she demanded to see me, threatening to leave against medical advice if I didn't come. The doctors warned that she could die without treatment. The emotional manipulation was transparent but effective. I sat outside her room, visible through the window but beyond conversation distance. She pressed her hands against the glass, mouthing apologies and pleas. Nurses reported she would only take medications if they told her I was watching. She'd turned her own health into another tool for control. I stopped visiting. My discharge came first. As my grandmother wheeled me past her floor, I could hear her screaming my name. The sound followed us to the elevator, down to the parking garage, into the car. It echoed in my head for days. She was released 2 weeks later, medically stable but psychologically fragile. The court mandated therapy and medication compliance monitoring. She had to submit to weekly blood tests, proving she was taking her prescriptions. The irony of forced medical compliance wasn't lost on anyone. For my 18th birthday, she sent a package to my father's lawyer. Inside were 18 years of medical records, research, and journals documenting every symptom I'd ever had. She'd been tracking my health since birth, looking for signs of the disease she knew I might inherit. The obsession predated my diagnosis by over a decade. Among the papers was a letter to my future self, written when I was born. In it, she promised to protect me from the suffering she'd endured, to make sure I never felt the shame and isolation of chronic illness. She'd loved me into sickness, trying to shield me from a reality that couldn't be avoided. I burned it all in my grandmother's backyard, watching years of obsessive documentation turn to ash. My father held my hand as the smoke rose, carrying away the weight of her projections. It felt like an exorcism. The restraining order expired on my 19th birthday. I didn't renew it. Instead, I sent her a single condition through lawyers. She could have supervised contact if she maintained therapy and medical compliance for 6 continuous months. It was the same standard the court used for reunification in abuse cases. She lasted 3 months before stopping therapy, convinced the psychiatrist was trying to brainwash her. The cycle continued, but I was no longer trapped in it. I had my own life, my own treatment plan, my own relationship with my illness that didn't include her fear. I graduated high school from my grandmother's district, surrounded by people who knew me as more than the girl who collapsed at state championships. College applications asked about overcoming challenges. I wrote about learning to advocate for myself, about breaking cycles of medical trauma, about finding identity beyond illness. My mother still sends letters to my father's house. He forwards them unopened to a storage unit, documented but unread. Someday I might be ready to face them. For now, I focus on healing, on building a life where lupus is part of my story, but not the entire narrative. The last time I saw her was at a rheumatology conference my doctor recommended. She was in the audience, taking notes at a lecture about pediatric lupus treatment. She looked healthier, her face less swollen, her movements more controlled. When she saw me, she started to approach, then stopped herself. We stood across the convention center, 2 women with the same disease and entirely different relationships to it. She raised her hand slightly, a question and a greeting. I nodded once before turning away. It was the most honest interaction we'd had in years. My father says she's doing better. She has a support group now. Other parents of chronically ill children who've struggled with control and fear. She's learning slowly that love doesn't mean preventing all pain, that protection can become its own form of harm. I still take my medications every morning, still see Dr. Patel every month, still manage flares and symptoms, but I do it on my terms, without shame or secrecy. photography. The butterfly rash across my cheeks is visible most days. I've stopped covering it with concealer. The conference encounter haunted me for weeks. Every morning, I'd catch myself checking over my shoulder, expecting to see her following me to class. My grandmother noticed the tension returning to my shoulders, the way I'd freeze when unknown numbers called. 2 months into my sophomore year of college, I received an official-looking envelope at my dorm. My roommate, Reese, handed it to me with raised eyebrows. Inside was a court summons. My mother was petitioning to have my medical records released to her, claiming I was mentally incompetent to manage my own care. My hands trembled as I read through the legal documents. She'd compiled years of evidence, photos from the private investigator showing me looking tired after classes, documentation of every missed family event, even screenshots of social media posts where I'd mentioned feeling unwell. Her argument centered on my deteriorating condition under my father's care. I called my father immediately. He was already at his lawyer's office, having received his own summons. The petition named him, my grandmother, and Dr. Patel as co-conspirators in medical neglect. She'd even included Mrs. Luna from my high school, claiming the nurse had enabled dangerous behavior by storing my medications. The lawyer explained that while the case had little merit, we'd still need to respond. My mother had found an attorney willing to take her case, probably drawn by her ability to pay up front with her remaining credit. The hearing was set for 3 weeks away. I spent those weeks gathering my own documentation, medical records showing improved health markers since leaving her care, attendance records from college proving I'd missed fewer classes than the average student, character references from professors who knew about my condition but saw me thriving. My father hired a medical expert to review my treatment history. The expert's report was damning for my mother's case. It detailed how her interference had led to dangerous gaps in treatment, how the emergency interventions she'd forced had actually worsened my condition. The report specifically noted that my current stability came from consistent, uninterrupted medical care. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully in professional clothes that couldn't hide the mild rash across my cheeks. I'd stopped being ashamed of visible symptoms. My grandmother drove me to the courthouse, my father meeting us in the parking lot. My mother was already there, sitting with her lawyer in the hallway. There's something oddly fitting about her using the legal system she once ignored to try and regain control. Makes me wonder if she truly believes her own narrative, or if she knows deep down she's grasping at straws. She'd lost more weight, her own symptoms clearly unmanaged. When she saw me, she stood halfway, then sat back down at her lawyer's touch. Her eyes tracked my every movement. Inside the courtroom, the judge reviewed the case with obvious skepticism. My mother's lawyer presented their argument, that I was too young to understand the long-term consequences of Western medicine, that my father had isolated me from my mother's protective influence, that my current stability was temporary and masking deeper damage. When my mother took the stand, she broke down repeatedly. She pulled out photos of me from before my diagnosis, pointing out my healthy glow compared to my current appearance. She claimed my medications were aging me prematurely, that natural treatments could restore my former vitality. Our lawyer's cross-examination was methodical. He asked about the disposed medications, the forced supplements, the psychiatric hold. My mother deflected each question, insisting everything she'd done came from love and superior research. When asked about her own medical noncompliance, she claimed it was protest against a corrupt system. I took the stand next. The judge asked direct questions about my treatment, my living situation, my ability to manage my condition. I explained my daily routine, my relationship with Dr. Patel, my academic success despite chronic illness. I kept my answers factual, resisting the urge to attack my mother's behavior. My mother's lawyer tried to paint me as brainwashed, asking leading questions about whether I'd been turned against natural healing. I responded with citations from peer-reviewed studies about lupus treatment. When he suggested I was too young to make medical decisions, I reminded him I was 20 years old. Dr. Patel testified via video link, her schedule too packed for court appearance. She detailed my treatment history, the dangers of the gaps my mother had created, my current stable condition. She emphasized that lupus required consistent medical management, that alternative treatments alone could be fatal. The judge's decision came swiftly. Not only was my mother's petition denied, but the existing restraining order was reinstated and extended. The judge noted that my mother's continued harassment and legal manipulation constituted ongoing abuse. She was ordered to cease all attempts at contact, direct or indirect. My mother screamed when the verdict was read. Court officers had to restrain her as she lunged toward me, shouting about saving my life. Her lawyer tried to calm her, but she turned on him too, accusing him of being part of the conspiracy. They removed her from the courtroom still screaming. Outside, my father hugged me tightly. My grandmother wiped away tears. We'd won, but it felt hollow. The woman being dragged away was still my mother, still sick herself, still trapped in delusions that love meant control. That night, I couldn't focus on homework. Reese found me staring at old family photos on my laptop, pictures from before my diagnosis, when my mother's anxiety hadn't yet transformed into paranoia. She looked happy in those photos, holding a younger me who had no idea what was coming. The next few months passed quietly. No letters, no private investigators, no surprise legal filings. I threw myself into school, joining a chronic illness support group on campus. Other students understood the balance between managing symptoms and pursuing dreams. We compared medication schedules and exam strategies, finding humor in shared experiences. Spring semester brought unexpected challenges. A severe flu outbreak on campus triggered a lupus flare that landed me in the hospital for a week. As I lay in the hospital bed, IVs dripping familiar medications, I found myself thinking about my mother, not with anger or fear, but with something closer to pity. My father visited daily, bringing homework and updates from professors. My grandmother sent care packages with soft socks and herbal teas that actually helped, unlike my mother's forced concoctions. Friends from my support group stopped by between their own classes and treatments, Recovery was slow but steady. I missed 3 weeks of classes but worked with disability services to catch up. My professors were understanding, having seen me manage my condition responsibly for over a year. One even shared her own autoimmune journey, offering practical advice about academic accommodations. Summer arrived with an internship offer at a local nonprofit focused on healthcare advocacy. They specifically wanted someone who understood chronic illness from personal experience. I accepted immediately, excited to turn my painful journey into something meaningful. My first day, I met Robert, another intern who had type 1 diabetes. We bonded over medication schedules and the frustration of well-meaning people suggesting cinnamon or yoga as cures. He became a close friend, someone who understood without explanation why some days were harder than others. Working at the nonprofit opened my eyes to how many families struggled with medical control issues, parents who couldn't accept their children's diagnoses, young adults fighting for medical autonomy, the complex intersection of love and harmful behavior. I recognized my story in theirs. One afternoon, while preparing materials for a support group, I found a familiar name on the attendance list. My mother had signed up for our Parents of Chronically Ill Young Adults workshop. My supervisor noticed my face pale and quickly reassigned me to different duties that day. I watched from the office window as she arrived early, sitting alone in her car for 20 minutes before entering. She looked better than at the courthouse, wearing clothes that fit properly, her hair neatly styled. She'd brought a notebook and pen, settling into a back corner seat. The facilitator later told me she'd participated appropriately, asking relevant questions without dominating discussion. She'd shared briefly about struggling to accept her daughter's independence, about learning to manage her own condition after years of denial. She didn't mention names or specifics. She attended every week for 2 months. I made sure to work in different areas of the building those days, but I'd catch glimpses of her arriving and leaving. She never tried to find me, never lingered in the parking lot, never pushed boundaries. She just attended, participated, and left. My supervisor eventually asked if I wanted her removed from the program. I thought about it for days before deciding no. If she was genuinely trying to learn, to change her perspective on medical control, I wouldn't interfere, but I also wouldn't engage. My healing couldn't depend on hers. Senior year began with renewed energy. I'd been selected for a competitive research position studying quality of life in young adults with autoimmune conditions. The work felt personal, but important. Every survey response, every data point represented someone like me navigating illness and independence. My thesis advisor encouraged me to include autoethnographic elements, weaving my own experiences into the academic research. I hesitated at first, unsure about exposing my story to academic scrutiny, but as I wrote, I found power in naming what had happened, in analyzing it through theoretical frameworks. The research revealed patterns I recognized intimately: parents who confused protection with control, young adults forced to choose between family relationships and medical autonomy, the lasting trauma of having bodily autonomy violated by those who claim to love you most. Graduation approached with bittersweet anticipation. I'd been accepted to graduate programs in public health, excited to continue advocacy work. My father planned a small celebration with my grandmother and close friends. No extended family, no risk of unexpected appearances. The week before graduation, a package arrived at my father's house. Unlike previous packages, this one was small, professionally wrapped. Inside was a single item, my baby bracelet from the hospital, the one that had been in my mother's jewelry box since birth. A typed note said simply, "This belongs to you. Congratulations on your graduation." I held the tiny bracelet, reading my name in faded ink. No manipulation, no medical articles, no pleas for contact, just an acknowledgement that something of mine should be returned. I slipped it into my jewelry box, unsure what to feel. Graduation day dawned clear and warm. I took my medications with breakfast, applied sunscreen to protect my sensitive skin, and put on my cap and gown. The butterfly rash was visible in every photo, and I didn't care. It was part of me, like my brown eyes or stubborn streak. As I walked across the stage, I spotted my father and grandmother in the audience, cheering loudly. My support group friends whistled and clapped. Dr. Patel had sent a congratulations card that my father held up. This was my chosen family, the people who supported without suffocating. After the ceremony, as we gathered for pictures, I noticed a familiar figure at the far edge of the parking lot. My mother stood by her car, watching from a distance. She didn't approach, didn't wave, didn't try to catch my attention. She simply watched for a moment, then got in her car and drove away. My father noticed too, tensing beside me. I touched his arm gently, shaking my head. There was nothing to do, nothing to say. She'd respected the boundaries while still finding a way to witness this milestone. It was progress, even if incomplete. That evening, surrounded by friends and chosen family, I reflected on the journey, from hiding my illness to embracing it, from being controlled to claiming autonomy, from shame to advocacy. The lupus remained, would always remain, but my relationship with it had transformed. I still take my medications every morning, still see Dr. Patel regularly, still manage flares and symptoms, but I do it as a whole person, not a hidden one. Looks like Mom finally discovered the art of sitting quietly in the back row. Only took a restraining order and 2 years to unlock that achievement. My illness is part of my story, not my entire identity. The scars, visible and invisible, remind me of survival and strength. The storage unit of unopened letters remains sealed. Someday I might read them, trace the evolution of my mother's thoughts, or I might let them remain unread, artifacts of a painful time. For now, I focus forward, building a life defined by my choices, not her fears. My work in public health continues, advocating for young adults navigating chronic illness and family dynamics. Every story I hear echoes parts of my own. Every person fighting for medical autonomy deserves support and validation. The personal has become professional, pain transformed into purpose. The butterfly rash across my cheeks remains visible most days. I've stopped seeing it as something to hide. It's evidence of my body's struggle, yes, but also its persistence. Like me, it refuses to be concealed or ashamed. We exist openly, honestly, without apology. Thanks for wandering through all this with me. Definitely a journey worth sharing. Until next time, keep questioning everything. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.